All right, so we're picking up with Acts chapter 24. And so we had Paul's escape from Jerusalem, and now we will be having so now he has the opportunity to have a trial, and it's kind of the third of three trials. So we had one trial under Lysias Claudius, or Claudius Lysias, in Jerusalem. And then, so Paul gets whisked away after that. There's a plot to kill him. And so Claudius Lysias has sent him down to Caesarea Maritima, to the actual governor, Felix. So now we're going to have the trial number 2. And so as we go through these trials, again, it's kind of like, we know from the narrative and from Luke's narrative style that Luke is perfectly capable of glossing over several years with a sentence or two, right? It's just kind of like, and so that happened, and now we're here. And, or he spent 2 years in Corinth, and, fast forward. But here is all of a sudden, Luke is really slowing down the narrative and really going through these trials in painstaking detail. And you kind of wonder, okay, so what is he up to? Why is Luke describing 3 different trials? It's like, one in Jerusalem, one here with Felix, there'll be another with Herod Agrippa, the second with under the Roman governor in another chapter. And so why spend all these trials instead of saying, and Paul underwent many trials and was finally remanded to the imperial custody and went to Rome, and then you go right into the exciting sea voyage part, right? So you have a sea voyage, and it's kind of like, let's get to that. That's exciting. There's a storm and a shipwreck and all that good stuff. So why do this? In a sense, it's for the same reason that Luke really slows down the speed of the narrative around the time from chapters 10 to 15, where, for example, he has Peter, he repeats the story of the inclusion of the Gentiles at Cornelius's house. The whole baptism of Cornelius and his household. We kind of get that 3 times, right? Once when it happens, the first time Peter, describes it, and then that's the second time when he goes to the council and the Jerusalem council and tells all about it. And then we have Paul go out in his mission, and then you have yet another council meeting in Acts in chapter 15. So from chapters 10 to 15, Luke really makes sure that you have an opportunity to fully kind of read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest the opening of the mission to the Gentiles, right? In the sense that he really makes sure you've got time to process the fact that the Holy Spirit has done something new. So here with Paul is he wants to unpack something else in a very in a kind of a painstaking and thorough way. And what he's unpacking is, in a sense, Paul's final bona fides has a representative of the Jewish faith for Gentiles. That is that what he's going to be doing, and what you can kind of see through these 3 different trial scenes is Luke allowing Paul to demonstrate that he's not a renegade, he's not a troublemaker, right? He is, and that the Jesus Messiah, the messianism that Paul is preaching and bringing to the Gentiles is something that is an authentic growth from Judaism itself. That this isn't something that Paul just kind of made up and out of whole cloth. And although Paul is ethnically Jewish, this message that he's preaching about Jesus Messiah is something that he just kind of made up independently of his old faith, right? So what Luke is trying to do is show, no, Paul was truly a Jew, and that this movement towards Jesus is something that is an authentic and genuine outgrowth from the Jewish faith. Why would that be important, right? Well, I'll cover that when we get to it, because there's a quintessential part of this trial scene that will really kind of open it up for us. So I just want you to have that in the back of your head, because otherwise, again, this never gets read in church. It can be sometimes, it can be somewhat tedious, because there are no miracles or anything, like, where are the miracles, or give me a shipwreck or something, give me some excitement, a riot, give me a riot, that's exciting. And so it doesn't have any of those things that make Luke's narratives so exciting in so many other places. But so let's go ahead and kind of dig into this here. So 5 days later, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and an attorney, a certain Tertullus, and they reported their case against Paul to the governor. So then it says, when Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him. So a certain Tertullus shows up. Well, Tertullus is not a Jewish name. So what is the Sanhedrin done? They've gone out and hired a pagan attorney with a good Roman name to represent their case to the Roman governor, right? I mean, if you want to go and win in their court, you better, like, if you go to France and you get in trouble in France, you better hire a French attorney. It's like you don't want to hire somebody from New York City. I mean, you want to hire, if you get in trouble in some southern town, you should probably hire the defender who lives in that town, right? And can represent your case with the twang and everything. So, usually, I mean, here, an attorney from out of town that's been in the news recently, usually my cousin Vinny doesn't work out well. Usually that doesn't turn out well for the defendants, okay? So what the Jewish high priest and his crew do is they go out and they hire a certain Tertullus, a clearly pagan Gentile attorney to represent their case to a Roman citizen. So, against Tertullus, who is, a practiced attorney at law, you have Paul. It's kind of like, and in the other corner, Paul of Tarsus, and it's like, boo. And what Luke is kind of setting up here is the epic mismatch, right? So you have the high priest of Jerusalem, his entourage, they've got this fancy lawyer that they brought in to try the case. And then you've got little Paul, and Paul doesn't have anybody there. It doesn't say Paul and Timothy and, all these guys. It's just Paul by himself. So so Luke wants to show that, in a sense, the trial starts out completely unfair to Paul from the get-go, right? So not looking good for Paul, but don't you worry, right? Don't you worry. Hang in there, gentle reader. Okay, so Tertullus starts out with a perfectly saccharine and just disgustingly sweet, opening gambit of flattery. Your Excellency, because of you, we have long enjoyed peace, and reforms have been made for this people because of your foresight. We welcome this in every way and everywhere with utmost gratitude. It's like, but I mean, and so Luke is just like, I was like, they clearly, this is this pagan attorney. So starts out the way we would expect. But to detain you no further, I beg you to hear us briefly with your customary graciousness. We have, in fact, found this man a pestilent fellow. I don't think that gets said enough. I mean, a pestilent fellow. Now, of course, I think there are certain words we should bring back into common use, and I think pestilent is one. I nominated, but of course we have to understand that in the nowadays when we say that somebody's being a pest, I mean we could say that about a pet or a toddler that we actually like, right? I mean, so pest is something that has in our common English usage is something that has been kind of domesticated. But in the original and the kind of the Greek usage, pestilence was not anything to play around with, right? It'd be kind of like this pandemic-y fellow, I mean, you know, that'd be the kind of the gist. It's like, he's horrible, he's evil, he's a scourge. So that's what it means to be a pestilent fellow, is to truly be a scourge, an evil scourge on the face of the planet. Right? So we have found this man a pestilent fellow, an agitator among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And so ringleader, or in my Bible is translated ringleader. It could be, there could be other translations. The literal kind of if you were to translate the word literally, it'd be kind of like the first disturber, right? He's kind of like the preeminent disturber, and so it's kind of first in rank among pestilent people. And so it gets translated with stuff like ringleader. And the sect is, the sect of the Nazarenes is, the words for sect is the hieresis, or which we get the word heresy from. So kind of presenting Paul as an illegitimate, right, representative, or an illegitimate rogue member of the Jewish nation. You know, a heretic, in other words, leading this a heresy of the Nazarene. He even tried to profane the temple, and so we seized him. And so profaning the temple is a serious charge. Again, for we moderns, it's hard for us really to grapple with the emotional content of the concept of profanation. Right? We don't believe in profaning anything. I mean, nothing's profanable because nothing's sacred, right? I mean, it's there's really very little. I mean, I'm trying to imagine, it's like, the closest we get is authorized personnel only. I mean, it's just like, you're not supposed to be here, right? I mean, do you have a badge? Do you have a backstage pass? I mean, the notion that someone stepping foot on in a place would somehow fundamentally destroy that place's power, or render it, or create a situation that had to be immediately and forcefully handled, is in a sense outside our, okay, so for Cowboy fans, it's the star at the 50-yard line. Okay, so there you go. So that might be profaning the football field, I guess. That's right. All right. So that's so that's kind of the it's like, anyway, so you can get it. So profaning the temple, this, by the way, would be punishable by death. So that would be a death penalty offense to profane the temple. And again, what they're referring back to was that he was accused of bringing a Gentile into the temple precincts. And of course, we as readers of the narrative, we know that that's absolutely false, right? So for Luke's reader, for the Gentile Christian reader of Luke, what this is doing is in a sense has the lawyer for the high priest heaps, kind of piles on these charges that are all garbage, right? It only serves to discredit Paul's accusers, right, in the eyes of the Gentile Christian reader. And now the one piece that is interesting, it says, so we seized him. And then in some manuscripts, you may have this in your footnotes, or you may actually have it in your translation, it depends. But it says in some manuscripts, it goes on to say, and we would have judged him according to our law. But the chief captain Lysias came, and with great violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come before you. So again, it's one of those questions where it's, very good, very reputable scholars, very good scholars feel that is authentic, and others say no, that's an interpolation, or that was put in later as an attempt to explain what is going on. But regardless, the idea that we arrested him is suggesting is this, and which then the added verse, if you kind of put that verse in, what it's suggesting is, listen, this guy is actually we arrested him. We want him back in our custody. you Romans, what kind of the subtext of this is that, frankly, you Romans kind of overstepped your jurisdiction. He was in our temple, and according to our agreement, that Jews get to be judged by Jews for religious infractions, and we arrested him. He was in our custody, and then your guy Lysias came and extradited him, without our permission, to Caesarea Maritima. So a part of what's going on here is we want him back in Jerusalem. Bring him back to and we want to, it's kind of change of venue. So there's kind of this is part of what's the subtext here is a change of venue request that he was kind of illegally, if you will, or unduly taken out of the ability of the Jewish Sanhedrin to handle according to their law. So then he says, by examining him yourself, you will be able to learn from him everything, or to learn from him concerning everything of which we accuse him. Now, again, for those of you who've been with me in Acts for a while, you should know that what he's suggesting by examining him is not just asking questions, right? Basically, give him a little bit of scourging, and he'll spill all the beans, just a little light torture would all that be required to get everything you need, Felix, to figure out what the truth is here, right? In a sense, what they're pointing out is we were deprived of the opportunity to examine him back in Jerusalem. So if you were to do it for us, Felix, that would be swell. We'd love for you to do that. By the way, that's exactly, in a sense, what Pontius Pilate did for the Sanhedrin in Jesus's trial. That Jesus's scourging at the hands of the cohort of the Antonina fortress was precisely that sort of examination, right? Except it was an exam, and so they kind of, again, if you look back at the Passion, in a sense, they kind of, they torture him and then they send him back into Pontius Pilate to be asked some questions, right? So where is this kingdom coming from? Who do you say that you're, that you're representing again, etc. And that would be standard Roman judicial procedure. Okay, so he ends his speech by saying, examine him yourself and you'll be able to learn everything you need to. The Jews also joined in the charge by asserting that all this was true. So again, it's kind of like, all the guys, kind of like all the guys in the back, it's like in a courtroom drama, where all the crowd in the back benches behind the lawyer, like, yeah, that's right. And so they all start shouting. When the governor motioned to him to speak, Paul replied. So now Paul is to speak in his own defense. I cheerfully make my defense, knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation. Now, that's the only line of quasi-flattery, right, that Paul will use. But it's a flattery with a barb in it. That is to say, not for Felix, but for Paul's opponents. In a sense, Paul is saying, I have nothing to worry about here, Your Honor, because you actually have experience with these people, right? You've been a judge over this people for many years now. You know exactly, see, that's the subtext of what Paul's doing here is he's saying, you know exactly how these Jews love to argue and go after each other, right? Which is exactly what Paul did in the trial of Lysias, right? He said, I'm on trial for concerning the resurrection of the dead. And immediately the Sadducees and Pharisees start, arguing with each other in the middle of the courtroom, and it becomes so violent that that's when Lysias has to pull Paul out of the room. So in a sense, Paul's saying, you know how they can be, right? And so you have experience. So I'm not worried at all about you being, kind of bamboozled by Tertullus over here, representing the case of the Sanhedrin of Jerusalem. As you can find out, it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. So there are two things that Paul, and so again, part of what Luke gives you is a classic example of beautiful Greek rhetoric in that it has the art of brevity. And you may not, again, it was the Greek rhetoricians praised brevity. They thought it was one of the preeminent virtue of speakers. It was often honored in the breach, of course. But in this one sentence, Paul is saying two things. Number one, I haven't been around long enough to be a true disturber of it. I mean, it's like I've only been here 12 days, including the time that I've been sitting here cooling my heels in your jail for 5 days. So it's like, I just got here, Your Honor. I mean, they're portraying me as this like arch, disturber of the peace. And I mean, my golly, it's only been 12 days since I, went up to Jerusalem. And then the second piece is, why did I go up to Jerusalem? Well, I mean, Your Honor, as a pious Jew, I went there to worship. That's the only reason I was there. I was there to worship the God of Israel in the temple. So Paul presents himself as truly a traditional pilgrim to the city of Jerusalem. And again, see what that's doing is that's underlining what I described at the outset as Luke's general thematic purpose in these trial scenes. He wants to bring out or highlight the ways in which Paul is a faithful Jew. So, and he does that by having Paul himself describe how he is a faithful Jew. Hey, Your Honor, I was only there to worship. That's all I was doing. And they, by the way, when they arrested me, where was I? I was there in the temple. What was I doing? They did not, in verse 12, they did not find me disputing with anyone in the temple or stirring up a crowd, either in the synagogues or throughout the city, right? They didn't arrest me doing any of those things. Neither can they prove to you the charge that they now bring against me. And so in a sense, he's saying, hey, listen, I'm innocent of these charges. And then here comes the dramatic turn. And so this is in the courtroom speech, this is the dramatic turn. But this I do admit, and you can kind of, you have to hear Paul kind of pause for emphasis, like, oh, I will admit to something though. And so it's like, you have to imagine like there, ooh, what is he going to admit to? I admit to you that according to the way, which they call a heresy, I worship the God of our ancestors. Basically, I confess to being a faithful Jew. That's the only thing I'm going to confess to, right? And it's like they don't, they're going to try, I can prove it. Unlike those guys, they can't even prove their charges, that I'll be able to prove that I'm a faithful Jew, Your Honor. So he says, and he uses, in the same sense to describe the movement of Jesus' followers, one inside term and an outside term. That is, he uses the phrase the way, which is the insider term for the Jesus movement, right? So, and then he says, and then which they call a heresy, which is the outside term, that I worship the God of our ancestors. So he's saying I'm fully within the Jewish tradition, right? I'm not a rogue. I'm not some, wackadoodle wingnut. I am fully within the tradition. And then he goes on saying, believing everything laid down according to the law or written in the prophets. And that's the quintessential, that's the nub of the issue there. That Paul claims to be, in a sense, to be the faithful articulator of the true Judaism. Right? Basically what he's saying here is, I am at my messianism, my following of Jesus Messiah, is actually a better understanding of the law and the prophets than the one these guys have. Okay? So I worship the same God. It's not a different God. It's not some pagan God. It is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that I believe everything laid down according to the law or written in the prophets. And then he goes on to give the Christian distinctive, right? So it kind of begs the question, okay, well, what is the difference then? Here it comes. I have a hope in God, a hope that they themselves also accept, of course, though not in the same way, right? that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. So once again, Paul underscores that the difference between himself and Second Temple Judaism is the resurrection, but in particular, it's the resurrection of Jesus. That's the difference between Paul and his opponents. And this really, in many ways, exemplifies one of the ways that the apostolic church understood the scripture, the relationship between the scriptures and the apostolic proclamation. Which, or in other words, as what we as modern Christians call the Old Testament versus the New Testament. Right? Since the Old Testament for Paul those were the scriptures, and I've said that again and again. But we always need to remind ourselves, because we're so conditioned by our language to kind of think, oh, the scriptures are the Old and New Testaments. But again, not so for Paul. The scriptures were the law and the prophets and the writings, right? That is in other words, the Old Testament. And so the apostolic proclamation, in Greek is the kerygma, the proclamation of Jesus Messiah, was something that was the Greek word that they used for it was an epitome of the scriptures. In a sense, that's how they understood what they were doing. In a sense, we are epitomizing the scriptures of Israel. That is, we're boiling them down, and what we are proclaiming is the essence of the message of the law and the prophets. It is Jesus Messiah, who has been crucified and raised from the dead. That is a summary, not of the New Testament, but of the Old Testament. And see, that's what we as modern Christians, that's what we as people who are, 2 millennia down the road, what we have to understand is that that's how they understood what they were doing. In a sense, before their writings became our scriptures, what they thought they were writing was an epitome of their scriptures, the Old Testament. In a sense, they felt that the writings of the New Testament, the texts, which were really, in many ways, the texts were simply epitomes of their spoken proclamation. I mean, in a sense, what we have as the New Testament is itself a summary, a condensation, and a systematic presentation of the oral epitome of the Old Testament given by the apostles. And in many ways, that apostolic generation saw their writings and their speaking to be in the same relationship to the Old Testament as we would now see the Creed to be in relationship to the New Testament, has a summary, condensation, systematic presentation of the essential truths contained therein, right? And that's how, so, and again, we way down the road, we've had things called like the medieval period and, the Reformation and the Enlightenment. So we have like the Old Covenant, the New Covenant, Old Testament. They're actually professors of something called Old Testament theology, which is different from New Testament theology, which is its own thing. For the apostles, that would not have made sense, right? The apostles saw themselves as doing what we would call Old Testament theology. The key to their theology was Jesus Messiah. And so that's what Paul, when Paul says that he believes everything laid down according to the law or written in the prophets, that's what is in his head. That's why he can say that with what he says is a clear conscience before God. Right? He said, therefore I do my best always to have a clear conscience toward God and all the people. What that sentence means is that Paul is saying, this is an authentic, sincere, and genuine presentation of my understanding of what the Old Testament, or for him, the scriptures really mean. That's what he's talking about. Of course, our Jewish friends and neighbors in modern America would have a different notion of what the law and the prophets were talking about. But that, again, we have to bracket that in order to understand what Paul is saying, right? What Paul is saying is, I am interpreting the law and the prophets according to their own inner logic as revealed by the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Messiah. Right? So again, it's a subtle point, but I think one that's important for us to be able to make, because again, we're so conditioned to having the whole thing be called the scriptures or the Bible, right? And the difference that makes for our own understanding of the text and of each of the parts of the text. So again, Paul is somebody who's saying, I'm coming here to show you or to share with you the fundamental meaning of the scriptures. Then, so continuing on, now after some years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to offer sacrifices. Remember what I was talking about with, that collection, and where did the collection go, and whatever happened to that collection, the money that he's been bringing with him from, the letter to the Corinthians. This is, I've been saving it up because, but this is the giveaway. This is how this verse right here, this is how we know that Luke knew that Paul brought a whole bunch of money with him from Macedonia and the regions of Asia to Jerusalem, because he has Paul mention it in this speech, right? So Luke knows about the collection. Now look at how Paul talks about the collection in the trial. Paul, of course, he knows the audience and what he has to do. So he doesn't say, I brought a collection for the Jesus-believing people in Jerusalem, which of course is from Corinthians. We know that's what he did. He does not say, I brought this collection to show how Gentile and Jewish believers in Jesus are part of one ethnos, right? One people. He doesn't talk about that. That's for a different audience. Paul here says, I came to bring alms to my nation and offer sacrifices. So in a sense, he presents himself as a traditional pilgrim, as somebody who is, doing a wonderfully every Jewish mother would be proud of what Paul was doing, right? Bringing money to his people in Jerusalem. That was all good stuff. Of course, what Paul does, he leaves out by omission the exact part of the nation to which he was bringing it. But let's not complicate it. Let's not complicate the case, right? So he doesn't want to enter, for sure he doesn't want to enter that fact into evidence. Then in verse 18, while I was doing this, they found me in the temple. Was I profaning the temple? No, I was completing the rite of purification. So Paul highlights the irony of the fact. And then remember, Luke brought this up by saying, when the 7 days were nearly over, for those that remember the haircutting fees and the vow of the Nazarites and how Paul pays for that, basically Paul's able to say, when they arrested me, I was actually in the process of, I had just become ritually clean, let alone, not only did I not profane the temple, I actually was ritually clean when they arrested me. How about that? So it is the kind of the height of the contradiction, right? The height of the contradiction. And then he says, and then he goes on to his next defense, or he says, and without any crowd and without any disturbance. So number one, I didn't profane it. I was actually the ritually cleanest person there. Right? And number two, there was no crowd and there was no disturbance. So there you go. So that, not guilty on those charges, either. And then he goes on to perhaps his strongest attack, procedurally. But there were some Jews from Asia. They ought to be here before you to make an accusation if they have anything against me. Or let these men here tell you what crime they had found when I stood before the council. In other words, Ananias and his crew who are standing here, they didn't see any of this go down. right? If you want witnesses, bring those Jews from Asia down here. They can be a witness. But all these guys saw was me say that I believe in the resurrection of the dead. Is that what I'm being tried for? Because I'll plead guilty to that. I mean, so it's really a brilliant thing. Basically, these guys don't have any standing to present the charges that are before you, Your Honor. They aren't even witnesses, so how can they make a charge? So, and so he says, unless it was this one sentence that I called out while standing before them, it is about the resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial before you today. So what Paul is basically saying, ends with is, hey, if they want to fight me on the ground of the resurrection of the dead, I'll be here all day, and I'm like, I'll be happy to do that, and twice on a Sunday, so if that's really what they're here for, and if it's all this disturbance and temple profanation stuff, these guys didn't actually see it. Just ask them, and I can tell you who might be able to give you a witness to that, but they're not here today. What a shame. I guess you're just going to have to drop the charges, Your Honor. Right? I mean, so that's kind of the summary of Paul's argument. So, having spoken, the camera lens shifts to Felix. Right? And so Felix, who was rather well informed about the way, adjourned, and you'll discover why he was well informed a few sentences down. But he was rather well informed about the way, adjourned the hearing with the comment, when Lysias, the tribune, comes down, I will decide your case. Then he ordered the centurion to keep him in custody, but to let him have some liberty, and not to prevent any of his friends from taking care of his needs. See, up until that time, basically Paul's in isolation. He's in solitary confinement. But now, with this judgment, basically Felix is saying, I'm not so, I think it's kind of, I'm not willing to dismiss now, but it's looking good. It's looking good for you, Paul. Now, there is one element of this that makes us worry about Paul. That is, Felix says, when Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. Well, here's the thing. We already know from Luke that Lysias wrote a letter. I mean, he wrote a letter saying, and in the letter, and I read, I found that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but was charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. So the careful reader will say, wait a second, Felix already knows what Lysias the tribune thinks. He wrote it in the introductory letter. So why is he now saying he wants to hear from Lysias at this point? Well, Luke is going to tell you. Okay? So, but it caused concern. Like, wait a second, this sounds like Felix was about ready to dismiss the case. What gives? All right, so we're going to find out what gives. Some days later, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, well, that's how he knows, that's how he's well informed about the way. He sent for Paul and heard him speak concerning faith in Jesus, Messiah. So how fascinating that they call him up. Now, Drusilla, these are real people in history. Both Felix and Drusilla are attested in Josephus and other documents. Drusilla was famous for, she was the daughter of Herod Agrippa I and sister of Herod Agrippa II, who's going to be the Herod who appears in this narrative. And she was famous for being actually very beautiful, a very beautiful woman. And she had married one of the local kings, one of the local kind of regional despots that the Romans had set up. But Felix met her at some sort of banquet and basically convinced her to divorce her first husband and come and marry him because she was so beautiful. He decided, I need to have you. So being the Roman governor gets what the Roman governor wants, especially when it comes to the local beauties. And so Drusilla goes and marries Felix. She comes up for considerable description in Josephus's account of what happened before the Jewish revolt in AD 66. And so he asked to hear about Jesus Messiah. And so Paul discusses justice, self-control, and the coming judgment. Now, like, okay, well, self-control, the Greek word for self-control can mean self-control pure and simple, but it also has a connotation of sexual self-control. So Paul, this is kind of like, Paul launches in to a sermon on justice, sexual self-control, and the coming judgment. What is the result? Felix became frightened. I'm not making this right here. It's like Felix became frightened and said, go away for the present, and when I have opportunity, I will send for you. So basically Felix says, I don't think I want to hear from this guy. And this is also should remind us of who John the Baptist, who falls afoul of Herod and his wife, because he said to Herodias, right? It is not lawful, for Herod, it is not lawful for you to have her. And so that's John's imprisonment. So this is also evoking themes from the gospel itself and showing you once again how Paul fulfills in his career many of the kind of milestones of the righteous messengers of God, John the Baptist, and of course Jesus Messiah. So then in verse 26, we get a little window into Felix's true motives in this whole deal. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given to him by Paul. And for that reason, he used to send for him very often and converse with him. So basically what Felix is ready to do, so then his wife's interest in the way clearly declines after this whole sermon on justice, self-control, and judgment. And so Felix, again, this is another indication that Luke knows, right, that Paul came to Jerusalem with a whole bunch of money. I mean, in a sense, the fact that Paul had a great sum of money with him has clearly reached the ears of Felix, who thinks he wants to try to get his cut. And says, okay, well, if Paul he doesn't know why Paul brought the money, he doesn't know what the whole backstory is, and he doesn't care. All he knows is this guy might be a source of cash. So he basically tries to shake Paul down. For how long? Verse 27, 2 years. So for 2 years, Felix basically tries to string Paul along and shake him down. And finally, Felix, the time runs out for the bribe, and Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. And since he wanted to grant the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. It's like, okay, fine. If you're not going to give me any money, I'll just leave you right here. And we'll see how and then with the new governor, that's going to create a new opportunity for the Jews in Jerusalem to try to come after Paul again. It's like, so new governor, new court case, let's roll the dice and see how we do. But part of the kind of the interesting background for Paul with his 2-year stay in Caesarea Maritima, in which he's in prison, but he is allowed to have his friends come and visit him, is that we think that this time period right here is precisely the time period in which the so-called prison letters would have been written by Paul. Especially the letter to the Colossians, the letter to the Ephesians, the letter to Philemon, as well as 2 Timothy. And so that those kind of imprisonment letters were written during this period while Paul's, kind of cooped up in Caesarea Maritima, and he's got nothing to do but write to his friends. Right? So good old Paul, it's like, nothing can keep that guy down. It's like, okay, fine, I'm in prison, I'm in quarantine, I'll run my churches by letter. And so, he starts shooting off letters to kind of straighten people out. And by the way, that's where Philemon, where the slave Onisimus finds him, who's the slave who's owned by Philemon, who's the recipient of that letter. So Onisimus manages to find him here in Caesarea Maritima, major seaport. And that is from here that you can see that Paul sends him back to Colossia via Ephesus. And that would have been on a, by the way, that, Ephesus was a major port. And so was Caesar. So that would have been kind of like it would have been like the route between Dallas and New York. I mean, it's kind of like, it would be a major regional route, back and forth. So it would have been very easy for a runaway slave to hop on a boat and get his way down to Caesarea Maritima if he thought he could meet Paul there. So that's kind of the backstory. So anyway, so that's the we'll kind of stop there because one trial is really enough for one day, and then we'll pick up again with Porcius Festus. But are there any questions before I go? I actually have some time now to answer questions. So if you want to, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or you can type it into the question. Okay, so let me unmute. Jennifer. Oh, why are you not? There you go. Okay.
So when Felix left and before when Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, would Felix have told Festus what happened with Paul, why Paul was in prison there, or? Well,
I mean, I'm sure that there'd be some sort of, kind of handing over of the administration along with all the prisoners. But it seems like basically Felix had the power to kind of grant, you could, your time is up. It's kind of like, a lame duck, and you can start to pardon people or set them free. And Felix decides, I think this Paul guy, I'm going to. Now we do know from history, both from Josephus and from Roman sources, that when Felix returned to Rome, that a delegation of Jews went to Rome and complained against Felix for his ill treatment of the Jewish people during his time as governor. So what we kind of read into that is maybe this was part of it, but if I give you Paul, will you drop your complaint against me? And so that there might have been some kind of bargaining and some effort at trying to head off trouble, and which evidently didn't work. So they still sent a delegation. Anyway, so that's kind of that background. Erica, so, did it take 2 years? Oh, well, that's the thing. Lysias never comes, right? The whole thing is a ruse. Felix has no intention of bringing Lysias down to get his testimony that would exonerate Paul and cause him to be freed. He uses that as an excuse to keep Paul right there secure, where he can try to shake him down for money. So it's like, you can imagine Paul, hey, Felix, have you sent off a letter to Lysias yet? Oh yeah, I'm right on that. I'll get to that next week. You betcha. Anytime now. So that's part of it's only at the end of the story that you figure out that whole Lysias thing was just a ruse through which Felix was trying to make some money off of Paul. And that, you get a sense of why why the Jews complained about Felix, because he was clearly, just your typical just greedy imperial official.